Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm talking about the other end of the spectrum, so hospital employment. I have no financial disclosures. I have two very adorable disclosures. Those are my kiddos, Jacob and Emma. First time away from Emma, she's 6 months. So now we're going to talk a little bit about hospital employment. So first thing about hospital employment, so this was my first job out of fellowship. So I did my residency at Cleveland Clinic and my fellowship at Stanford in California. And the idea of getting a job post-training is pretty daunting. You've been training a long time and now it's time to get an attending job. So first, finding and getting the job is step one. So usually these hospital positions are posted nationally on society job boards like SAGES, ASMBS, Indeed, and those are a good source of finding the initial, where things are open. Another big thing is word of mouth at academic institutions. So chairmans, any mentors you have, any Facebook groups you might be a part of, word of mouth is a big thing for finding an academic job. Most of them have a similar interview process. I would say you probably want to interview at multiple institutions if you can. And it's typically a telephone interview first as your first round. Then you have an invitation to interview in person, and they kind of roll out the red carpet. You feel very special. You have a person holding a sign and a black car, and it's a very new experience from residency. You typically interview with administrators, future colleagues, the vice chair, the chairman. Preparation is key for that. You want to know everyone you're interviewing with. You want to know where they trained, what they do, what you have in common, what things you can offer in terms of their interests and yours. And then typically you get an offer letter. Now, that begins the next step of contract negotiation, which I admittedly am very much a rookie at. But there are some key components I learned through experiential learning, because I literally knew none of this prior to experiencing it. So the key components, there's typically a base salary or a salary guarantee for typically the first 2 years. You need to know your worth and what the national norms look like for your specialty and for your training and for your region. So all those things factor in. The only things I know are the ACGME and the MGMA database. You typically don't have access to those. So unless you hire someone to help you with contract negotiation, the chairman typically has this, but you often don't. So I did hire a group to help with contract negotiation. There's also things that are negotiable, even though in academics you hear that things aren't. Moving expenses, educational allowances to come to conferences like this, sign-on bonuses, production goals, what happens in those first 2 years if you meet those goals in terms of a one-time incentive or some sort of bonus. How many FTEs you are coming in, meaning what your clinical status is versus education or research responsibilities, and then also knowing what track you're on in terms of clinical versus research track. So surgery is a business that was very new to me. I trained to be a great surgeon and knew nothing about administrative tasks or the business side of surgery. I'm still very much learning. So after your salary guarantee or the first 2 years, things change a lot, and that's something that hopefully is transparent at the beginning. But there are production goals in terms of RVUs, relative value units. I didn't know what that was, but evidently that's how you're measured, and it impacts what you make for yourself and for the hospital. You want to get credit for what you do. So in a hospital employment model, we have billers and coders. I don't do my own billing and coding. So my documentation is what provides the ability to get RVUs. So for example, if I do an abdominal wall reconstruction and I say it's an incisional hernia repair with mesh, well, the biller and coder will say incisional hernia repair with mesh. And that's much different than if I say bilateral myocutaneous advancement flaps and implantation of prosthesis and incarcerated incisional hernia and complex closure and all of these things. So my operative report is actually the key to me getting the appropriate RVUs for the 6-hour long haul of a surgery I just did. So in a hospital employment model, your documentation is very key because you're not the one billing and coding. So you actually have to be very precise on how you do all of that to get credit for the work you're doing. The other thing that it's a little bit different at each institution, but often in hospital employment, you have a salary that you're making, and then there's some sort of a production incentive. And whether that's you make a certain amount based on RVUs above your target, or whether you have an incentive and get some nebulous bonus at the end of the year, it's hard to say, but there's normally a production goal and some sort of an incentive. Expectations of the administration on you and you on the administration are very important, and that's something to discuss, and transparency is often hard to find in hospital employment, but it's important. So in my institution, we actually have in Epic a tool where you can see exactly how many RVUs you billed for each patient and each surgery, and that's a level of transparency that's not often available in hospital employment, but I'm happy that it is in mine. So getting down to the business, I said surgery is a business even in hospital employment. So FTE or your full-time equivalents are important because that tells you what percentage you need to achieve and it impacts your target. For example, I'm a 0.95 FTE. I don't get much time to do anything else. I should be working and operating. But that other 0.05 is for teaching, which is a huge benefit for me for hospital employment. I get to teach residents and medical students, and there's always a little entourage around us wanting to learn everything and hanging on every word we say, which is kind of fun. So that's actually one of my residents doing a robotic inguinal hernia repair, and we have a dual console, and I am not operating, she is, so I'm taking her picture. But that means that the residents get to learn from you, learn your ways, and you get to help train the next generation of surgeons, which I find very important. The other thing about the business of surgery and hospital employment is your clinical volume, your templates for clinic, your templates for OR, when you have block time, everything about my schedule is dictated by someone else. That can be good in that you have, it's very uniform, you know what to expect on any given day, but you also have very little autonomy over changing that. So how much administrative time I have is literally based on that 0.95 FTE. I have 1/2 day, twice a month, period. So that's a little bit interesting, a pro and a con, I guess, of academic surgery. Academic rank and progression is another thing that I didn't know that much about. Clinical instructor, aka super fellow, that some people come in as this. Then you have assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor. These academic ranks are what you're hoping to ascend throughout your career as a surgeon. At least I am in academic surgery. A progression timeline is very different at each institution. Typically, it's about 5 years between each academic rank. Some places are a little quicker at 3. Some places, the criteria are much more stringent, and you're looking at 7 years between advancement at each rank. There are a lot of considerations for promotion, and they all matter. So when you're making this big, beautiful file to present to to the medical school for promotion, they look at all these levels. So national levels, being invited for presentations, for talks, being on committees, going to national meetings, that's important. The state level, there's society chapters, leadership roles. Locally, for example, I'm in Cleveland, we have Cleveland Surgical, Midwest Surgical, Central Surgical. Getting leadership positions in these local groups is very important. Within the institution, being on hospital committees, having leadership roles and being involved in the training of your residents, whether it's program director, APD, wellness committee, whatever committee you can be on. And then within the medical school, there are also roles there. So you can see there's a lot to do to try and continue to academic progression. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about pros and cons. Now, forgive me, I am 8 months pregnant in that picture operating, but I showed it because the person across from me is one of my surgical PAs, Alex. And there are many layers of support in hospital employment. I have residents, I have PAs. There are nurse on-call lines if a patient's constipated post-op. There are medical students who are rounding 4 times a day and helping a patient use their incentive spirometer and walk. So there are many layers of support in academic medicine. As a result, that creates a little bit of a buffer for me. So I don't get that many pages at night. In terms of rounding, I can mainly do social rounds and make sure things are going well, but most of the notes, the orders, the nitty-gritty day-to-day work, I'm not having to do right now, so that's kind of nice. So a lot of the daily tasks, I have a little bit of a bubble around me in terms of achieving those. So some of the other pros for me for hospital employment are predictability. I know my salary, it may be lower than private, but I know it. My schedule is dictated and very predictable for the most part. Obviously, emergencies come up. There are a lot of resources with hospital employment, so you know, in my OR, pretty much anything is available at any time, and that's kind of nice. I don't have to think of necessarily the $ on each of those things. I was able to get very high patient volume immediately out of training with very little legwork. I showed up day one and had full templates, and that's really remarkable. So even though the first 2 years had a salary guarantee, I met those benchmarks with really no issue because there was people just coming to the hospital, and they weren't necessarily coming for my name, which hopefully I'll get to, but they were coming because they needed surgical care. They came to the hospital. I'm an employee of that hospital. So marketing, I have to do a lot less of. I enjoy marketing and want people to come for me, but when building a practice, it was a lot easier. And then in terms of the entrepreneurial spirit, I have none. So the ability to manage books, payroll, think about if people are getting their healthcare benefits, what their payday is, and if they were paid, hiring an office staff, buying chairs for the office. I want to do none of that. So I knew that for me as a person, that was not a good fit. So I have no business running tasks aside from like knowing RVUs and stuff like that, which I previously discussed. Potential cons, there are definitely cons with hospital employment as well. Potentially lower income. I'm kind of at the whim of what my chairman says we make, and academic surgeons typically make less than private practice. I have almost no autonomy over my schedule. Maybe once I'm there 15 years, that'll change, but right now at 2.5, I do as I'm told and say thank you. Parameters of practice are often dictated, like I said, my templates, what location I'm at on a given day, my administrative time, my OR block times are very much assigned. If I use them and fill them, which I constantly do, then you can potentially get more block time when I'm in endoscopy, when I'm doing outpatient cases versus big ones at Maine. Those are all dictated by an administrator, and that administrator is often not clinical. So we have true administrators and we have clinical ones, like the chairman, and the higher ups kind of dictate a lot of that. Inefficiency, I would say, is another thing of hospital employment. In private practice, you can often have 2 rooms. You have a team that knows you well. When you finish all your cases, you guys all get to go home. In hospital employment, that is not the case. My nurses are on shifts. They leave at 2 o'clock, and the new ones come in at 2. And whether my cases go quickly or go slowly or my turnover is an hour and a half, doesn't really affect them. However, it does affect me getting home to those 2 kiddos. So inefficiency is a part of it. Let's see. That was basically all I had, and that is the end of the talk, and that's my horrible mom joke.
Thank you, Dr.
Thanks.